understand First Amendment cases. You'll see that today we're actually able to add some new tests to the fire, so to speak. I want to just sort of recap. All right. So, one of the first questions we should always ask ourselves in any First Amendment case is sort of an obvious question: is what we're dealing with speech, right? Is it speech? You'll find in a lot of these cases that people try to pigeonhole everything they do into the context of speech. So I'll use an example from later this semester. Is baking a cake speech, right? Um, is wedding photography speech? Is being a DJ at a wedding speech? Is having a rock concert speech? That's like our reading for today. Burning a flag speech? Is it, burning a draft card? Is that speech? Burning a cross? Is that speech? There's a reason why everyone tries to sort of pigeonhole their conduct into the category of speech. And the reason is the court is generally very protective of free speech. So you get more protections from the court if what you're doing is speech. And so the very first question is this speech? And when you're answering that question, you're not limited to just the spoken word or the printed word or, a pamphlet. The court has an entire range of tests discussing expressive conduct. And this is where the burning stuff comes in, right? Burning a flag, burning a draft card, burning a cross. It's not literally speech, not speaking, but your conduct expresses a message. All right. So before you even go knee deep into a question, ankle deep into a question, first ask yourself, is this speech? Okay. All right. The second sort of thing to think about is your categories of speech. And for many years, the Supreme Court divided speech up into categories. And they said that some categories of speech simply are not protected as a matter of course. And the court has given examples of these categories of speech. So there's libel, there's the fighting word standards from Chaplinsky, right? There's the Brandenburg standard, which is the unlawful incitement of speech. If your speech falls within one of these categories, you're out of luck, right? Even if your words, you're a goddamn fascist, right? That's a fighting word, not protected. If you lie about someone, you say that he's a fraud, and that's not true. That's not protected. So you have to start thinking about what are the various categories of speech that might not be protected. I just want you to bracket this in your notes because in the 21st century, the Roberts Court has basically said, yeah, there are all these categories of unprotected speech, no more new categories. They sort of just put hold on new categories of unprotected speech. And this is really a doctrine from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and it's kind of just fallen by the wayside now. Come with me now. Okay. The next thing to think about is whether there's discrimination that's content-based or viewpoint-based discrimination. And students often have trouble distinguishing these two. And let me try and give you another example that might work. So imagine the government says, you cannot speak about the war in this location. We don't care if you're for the war. We don't care if you're against the war. You can't speak about the war. That's a content-based restriction, right? Because you're restricting the content, what they can speak about. Everyone see that? Okay, now it's a viewpoint. The government says, you cannot oppose the war in this space. You can support it. You can wave an American flag. You can say, go USA, right? But you can't oppose it. That's not content-based restriction. That's a viewpoint-based restriction. Why? The government is only prohibiting one particular viewpoint, that is being anti-war. Both content-based and viewpoint-based discrimination are very bad, and they're almost always unconstitutional. In some regards, viewpoint-based is even worse because they're letting you only speak about one side of the message. But generally, if you have a content-based restriction or a viewpoint-based description, you're going to review it with something like strict scrutiny, something very, very rigorous. It's unlikely to survive. Everyone with me? We got this? All right. So again, you have a fact pattern, an exam or otherwise, right? Ask yourself, is this speech we're talking about? Does it fall into one of these categories of unprotected speech? Is there viewpoint discrimination? Now, let me just pause here and mention RAV for a second. In RAV, the government tried to say this is like fighting words, like burning a cross in someone's lawn is basically fighting words, making them want to punch you. That might be true, right? But why was the speech protected in RAV? Because there was a viewpoint discrimination. Because it only prohibited certain types of fighting words, those that arouse anger on the basis of race. And if you read Scalia's opinion, it's sort of the combination of fighting words, but this viewpoint discrimination means it's unconstitutional. Why do I give you that example? You can't just stop at step 2 and say, oh, these are fighting words, we're done. You have to still consider, is there an attempt to prohibit a category with a built-in viewpoint discrimination, with a built-in content-based discrimination? If there is, you might get out of category 2 and you prevail in category on this third one. Does that make sense what I just said? So you have to walk through all these steps. And my friends, there'll be a lot of steps to walk through, only in class number 4. We have 3 classes from Mark, which I've been in forever, right? All right. Okay, so now after you sort of walk through all these different, oh, this is all old stuff. I'll give you new stuff in a few minutes, right? But after you walk through all these 4 different sort of lenses, you have to get to the sort of scrutiny question, right? The scrutiny question. And this is what will drive you sort of batty because you've all studied scrutiny in con law with the due process clause and with the equal protection clause and all the other stuff. And the tests here are different. I'm not going to repeat the O'Brien test again, the 4 factors. I've given you 100 times already. But you have to think about O'Brien, right? Which is something like strict scrutiny, something like intermediate scrutiny, falls somewhere between. It's pretty rigorous. It's hard to beat the O'Brien test, generally speaking. We're going to have another scrutiny test I'll give you today with time, place, and manner. I just want to give you this recap. Everyone, this is not new. This is all review. Everyone sort of see where we've been so far the last couple classes. Any questions so far? What are you eating? What is that? Oh, so you're putting a pack in your mouth. All right. Very good. Yeah, I don't care if you eat in class. Doesn't matter to me. Some professors upset. When we were in the COVID semester, people actually complained I was eating during class over Zoom.
That's why I thought it was okay to eat here.
No, you're fine. You're fine. No, it's true. It's time. I had like back to back. We during the COVID, we split classes in half. So we teach the same class back to back with half students. So basically 4 hours straight in class. That's all. Yeah, I was eating. You're right. I was eating. That's fine. All right. So everyone okay with these 4 things? Any questions in this? All right. Good. Let's move on till today's material. So has anyone ever been in a parade, march in a parade? When a parade is usually held? Saturday or Sunday, right? Usually down Main Street or, Louisiana, whatever the main drag is, right? I mean, this is an obvious question. Why are parades usually held on weekends?
Because they obstruct traffic.
Of course, unless you're the Houston Astros, in which case they hold the parade whatever day it happens to be. Generally, parades scheduled in advance are done on a weekend to avoid obstruction. Even the rodeo parade, which will be in a couple weeks, right? Is it a violation of the Constitution to say you must have parades on a Sunday? No, right? The government can say we are restricting parades in the street to a certain time. Is that based on your viewpoint? No. Is it based on what you have to say? No, right? The government can say to promote traffic considerations, we only want big parades on weekends. That's okay. And what if you say, you know what, I want to have a parade, right in front of City Hall, and I'm going to block all the traffic there for 8 hours. No, you can't do that. You can march somewhere else. You can march near City Hall, but not right in front of City Hall. All right, that seems okay because they're regulating the place of the protest. And let's say that you want to have a parade in which you're just burning crosses in the middle of the street everywhere else. I say, well, wait a minute. Burning crosses, that might be dangerous, right? People can get hurt. Is it? Or is that a way of keeping out Klansmen from marching? The topic today is what's called time, place, and manner restrictions, TPM, if you will. Time, place, and manner restrictions. And the general rule, right? The general rule is that when the government regulates speech, they can do so in a way that's content neutral and viewpoint neutral. And there are these three broad categories of regulations that are deemed to be okay. First one's the easy one. Regulating the time of speech, right? So you can imagine no protests in the middle of the night because people have to sleep. Okay, that seems reasonable, right? You can't protest down Main Street, at rush hour. That would be a very bad idea. So no one really objects to regulations on the basis of time. Place is a little bit trickier because very often the location of a protest is closely tied to the message that you want to convey. Think of our third case, Snyder against Phelps, right? The reason why their message was effective was because of where they had it. They had it right in front of the funeral. Had they held it anywhere else, like Alito says in his dissent, at any church in America, at any park in America, no one would have cared. But that particular place is why the message is so important. Location is important. But again, you can imagine that when the government wants to set certain areas for protests and parades, they can do that in a neutral fashion. Okay. Well, I'll get to manner in a second. So let's say that you go to City Hall and you say, I'd like to have a parade permit. And they say, okay, what do you want to march about? And you say, well, I remember the neo-Nazi party. We want to march to show off our views. They say, whoa, no, we don't like that message. Problem. That's viewpoint discrimination, right? If you walked in and say we want to have a St. Patrick's Day parade, or you want to have a Italian American parade or a Martin Luther King parade, that's fine, right? You come in, you want to be a skinhead, you can't do this. That doesn't work. So parades cannot be restricted on the basis of the viewpoint of those marching. You're not allowed to do that. Everyone agree with me on that one? Okay. Very famous case from Illinois from the 1970s, where a bunch of Nazis went to march in Skokie, Illinois, which is a very high Jewish population. And it was actually a very famous test case for the ACLU because they defended the right for the Nazis to march. More recently, a similar instance was the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, a couple of years ago. Funny story, I was there, not intentionally. A friend of mine was getting married that weekend at a country club, far from the Nazi. No, and I was actually staying in UVA at the time, and I actually drove past the rallies. I heard, "You will not replace us." I'm like, I'm right here. I saw the tiki torches, but they had the right to march, and courts actually ordered them to have the right to march. The problem was this is the problem when you have these two warring factions marching at the same time. You have to keep them separate. You need to keep them separated, and the police did nothing to keep them separate. That's why all the riots. You have to keep them far apart. You march there, you march and have a serious roadblock in the middle. Anyway, so there's someone's cup. I don't know. Centennial Gala. It's very nice. Anyway, so you can't shut down the basis of viewpoint. But the third one on the list, the time, place, and manner. Manner. That's one that actually gets people the most difficulty, because what does it mean, the manner of your speech? Does that refer to how loud you are? For example, the band shell case from New York, Rock Against Racism. Does that refer to the types of posters you might display? Does that refer to how offensive your speech might be? Think of the Snyder against Phelps case, right? What does manner mean? So a lot of this litigation about what manner means. But if you're somehow able to get across that you're not, that the government's not restricting in the time, place, or manner of speech, you're basically going to a very deferential standard review, right? The government can generally do that because it's viewpoint neutral. But if your so-called manner It's actually just another way of viewpoint discrimination. You're back in strict scrutiny land. Okay, bear with me. Alrighty. All right, Amy, help me out, please. Can you give me the facts in Ward versus Rock against racism? Great name for a case. I like this case name. RAR. Yeah, that's right. RAR. Good. Good. Good.
So they were a group that was holding basically concerts at Central Park. And Central Park had this.
Have you ever been to Central Park?
Yes.
Anyone ever been to Central Park? Yeah, Central Park is huge, and we have Discovery Green. It's like 5 seconds. You walk from end to end, right? Central Park is huge. It's like 40 city blocks. It's ginormous. So there's this basically this open meadow where there's no actual sheep there, right? But there were at some point, I suppose, where you can walk around, you can sit in the blankets, you can look at the birds, you can observe nature. It's very nice. And there's this. It's called a band shell. It's kind of like an amphitheater, right? It's kind of an open air theater where you can have concerts and they stage Shakespeare in the park and the like. All right, go on to me, please. You're welcome. That's easy part. Now you get the hard part.
All right, and so they were their venue, and the city had a regulation regarding the amplification of equipment, and
That's fine.
Okay, so the city,
Describe the amplification situation there, please.
so, it would regulate the volume of the music, and their interest in that was keeping the sheep's meadow for its purpose and having kind of a serene environment. And then there were also some residential areas near the band shell, and so trying to limit the sound reaching those.
Very good. Is that American Samoa Law School? Is that shirt you're wearing?
Yes.
Was they have a law school in American Samoa?
Better Call Saul.
Was that?
Better Call Saul.
Oh, it's a joke.
It's a show.
Oh, I didn't watch that show. Is that where you went to law school?
No, I go here.
No, but that's where Saul went to law school. I know where you go to law school. I can see. I can see. It's okay. Oh no, I didn't watch that show. Okay, got it. Okay. I all right. Thank you for that, Amy. Good, very good. Right. So here's the issue, right? You've all been to concerts, right? And you know that sometimes the audio equipment is not very good, and it sounds like garbage, right? There's feedback, there's interference. It doesn't sound good. So the city of New York said, "Aha, we have an idea. If you want to have a concert at our venue, you have to use our equipment and our technician." Right? That sounds reasonable. Right, Anna, why would the group object to having to use the city's sound equipment and the city's tech? I mean, that doesn't sound like an unreasonable requirement.
Because they want they probably hired someone to.
Well, sure, but they do in advance. They can cancel a contract. I mean, what's the big deal about having someone else manage your sound?
Yes, they can turn it down.
Yes. Have you been to a rock concert before?
Yes, actually.
Was it loud?
Rolling Stones, yes.
Oh, you went to them when they came here?
No, I was actually in Rome. It was really cool.
All right. Well, there. Was that the Coliseum?
No, but it was at Circus Fest.
Very cool. All right. I think they were around the original Roman Empire. They're about that old. So here's the issue, and this wasn't really clear in the case, but I'll sort of make it clear. Part of their message of rock and roll is to be as loud as possible. They didn't want some city official turning down their volume and not letting them rock out. You'll get what I'm saying? Again, I don't know music. I don't really even like music, but I've been told that back in the 70s, the only way to actually get it sound was to make it really loud because they didn't have any digital equipment. They just blast it out. And this Rock Against Racism group was worried that if they had some, city tech guy, it would make it really quiet, and they couldn't express their message. So really, it wasn't just a message of music against racism, whatever, right? They want to rock out, make it really loud, and they wanted to have speeches really loud. Now you can imagine that neighbors in this area, and by the way, this is on Central Park, east or west, I can't remember which, it's on Central Park West, right? They're really wealthy. Like that's where John and Yoko live, right? This is a very wealthy area. They didn't want these long-haired hippies playing loud music and disturbing their peace. Okay. So they challenged the requirement. Okay. Now the first question to think about, Adi, is this actually speech?
They said, like the first one, yes, music is speech because it's a form of expression.
You seem not to accept that. Or you seem skeptical. I don't know.
Oh,
What?
I don't know. It's I don't know if I'd say volume, if that's like the real issue they had is really speech. But like the court didn't really.
The court didn't touch it at all. Why not?
Well, they said the volume doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter what volume, you're still able to display your message.
But isn't the entire case about being really loud?
It is. Now that you said that.
Yeah, it's a weird part. This is always sort of, whenever I teach this case, it always sort of bothers me. No one was stopping them from speaking a particular message, right? Or saying this or saying that, giving a speech. The issue is only about, could they have their own tech who can make it really loud? That's what the case is about, right? They were allowed to have their concert. That wasn't an issue. But the court says music is a form of expression protected by the First Amendment. And they never explain why. And they never explain why the volume of the music is there. Now, there are cases about sound truck. Do you know what a sound truck is? For example, you have a truck with a speaker on the top, and it'll drive around a neighborhood and like broadcast a message on repeat, right? And there are cases about whether you can run a sound truck in the evening when people are sleeping. It's like, no, that's a time, place, manner restriction. But actually, if you think about it, before computers, what was an effective way of communicating messages to people when they're at home? With a sound truck. It was actually very effective. So this is why this manner element gets to be very, very fuzzy. But anyway, the court says the regulation of the music is itself a regulation of speech. All right. Let's see, Nick, is there any type of libel or fighting words or incitement going on at this concert?
No.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Nick, let me ask you a follow-up, please. Is New York's regulation based on content or based on the viewpoint of the musicians?
No, the court held it wasn't.
Right. All concerts have to use the same tech, right? So then now our question is, what scrutiny, right? How do we review this New York City ordinance? All right, so Cody, the court discusses different types of forums. FOR. Anna, did you go to the forum when you were in Rome?
Mhm.
Yeah. What's a forum, Cody?
Oh, you thought I get it to a forum.
I did, yeah.
Like the place in which the speech is being broadcasted.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we're putting number 5 on this list. I'm sorry. So there's something called forum or form analysis. I don't go super into this, but there are many different types of forums. There is what's called public forums, limited public forums, and private forums. Right. The forum refers to the place where the speech is being used. So the most famous public forum is a sidewalk. Right. Think of Snyder against Phelps. They made a big fuss about sidewalks. Did you notice that? The reason why is that the sidewalk is like the quintessential public forum because everyone's the right to walk on the sidewalk. Don't try to sleep there. Can't do that. But sidewalks are forum. Parks are also forums, and they're generally public forums, perhaps limited public forums. That is, you might be allowed to protest in a park from 9 to 5, but they close the park at 5. You can't go in there. Libraries too, right? Let's say the library rents out a room to anyone from the public. They've opened up a space for the public, and they can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. So libraries also are types of limited or designated public forums. Don't worry about this. This is not in your reading. I just want to give you a background. But there's also private forums. Like imagine you say, I want to protest inside the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. It's a government building. Let me protest there. And the answer is no way. Right? This is a forum. It's not open to the public. You can't go in there. So often think about what the forum is. But this case is easy. This is a public forum, right? They make the band shell open to all performers. So this is actually an easy case. This is not one where it's they've limited it. Okay. Dylan, they mentioned this case. It's a funny case. Clark versus Community for Creative Nonviolence, 1984 case. Do you remember what that case was about? It was referenced in the readings. Clark versus Community for Very Creative Nonviolence. What was that case about? Remember?
What it's found, it says, yes, the sergeant.
Anyone ever been to the White?
Maybe like a strict.
No. What were the facts of that case? Anyone know? Anyone got this one? So, anyone ever been to the White House? No, Lafayette Park, which is right across here from the White House. There's always people camping there and sleeping there, and they're protesting 24/7. And so at some point in the 80s, they said, okay, that's nice. This is a park. We're going to kick you out overnight. You can't sleep overnight. It's not a campground. It's a park. And so what the homeless people say? They said, aha, that us camping here is a form of expressive conduct. And they won. They prevailed. Because their camping out by the White House was itself expressive conduct. I mean, they were just sleeping on the floor, but that was their conduct. So even a park where you sleep on could be considered a public forum. All right. All right. Yes, Cody.
This might be a little off topic, but how does the court handle with people just using the First Amendment as a way to get permission to do what they want to do just because
Ain't that something, huh? That's why I told you at the start of class, people always try to pigeonhole whatever they're doing into speech. Even literally, people sleeping on the floor is considered speech. Strip dancing, right? Naked dancing, right? Exotic dancing, that's considered speech. I mentioned an example earlier, baking a cake is considered speech, right? So all these acts, which people say that's not speech, has been considered speech.
So like even like the homeless people camping, like they're truly just camping because they're homeless, not because they're.
Well, they say they're expressing a message. If they were camping not near the White House, it wouldn't be speech. If they're camping by the White House, it is speech.
The court not willing to argue with you that you're not actually speaking, you're just putting
Yeah, but come on, Cody. They come to court and they say, look, we are here to express a message that the White House is engaging in hostile policies towards the homeless, and we're trying to express our message by sleeping on the street next to the White House. What's more effective than that? That everyone who walks past White House sees, wow, there are a lot of homeless people here. Maybe we should do more for the homeless. I think it's an effective message. That's where the place matters. Look, if they camped in any other park in America, that argument wouldn't work. But by the White House, I think it works. You don't like it? No.
I think that it was just camping until
Well, you know what? Maybe some of them weren't homeless. Maybe some of them were just protesters who really were believed in the cause. Some of them were homeless, right? But there are probably some that they had homes who were trying to make a point. I mean, there are people who, if you go to the White House, they camp there 24/7. They just have basically encampments. They're always there. I don't know if the woman's still alive. When I was in law school, she was there for like decades. She had like a sign that says, "I've been here every day since whatever day it was." And I think I don't know if she's still there. I haven't seen her recently. No. I don't know where she was very anti-Semitic. That's all I remember. Love anti-Israel signs. That's one part I remember. Yeah, none of that now. From the Potomac to the Anacostia, right? Which river? Anyway, everyone with me? Okay, good. All right. So now we're at number 6 of this one. Don't worry about 5 too much. I don't think I'll come back to it, but just so it's in your memory banks. We have a test now for time, place, and manner. And if you want to shorten it, just TPM to remember. Time, place, and manner. Okay, and I'm just going to copy and paste so I don't screw it up in my notes. Okay. So this is the test. I'll make it a little bigger so you can see it. This is the test for time, place, and manner. Okay. And it goes like this. The government can impose reasonable restrictions. When you see the word reasonable, what does that make you think of? What type of scrutiny? Rational basis. Okay. The time, place, and manner standard is more or less like a rational basis or something close to it. It's very deferential. So again, if you're in O'Brien territory, it's something like strict scrutiny. If you're in the time, place, and manner category, it's something like rational basis. So you can always see what happens. The government says, aha, this is a content neutral, viewpoint neutral, time, place, manner regulation. Why will the government make that argument? They want to go to this test. This is actually very easy to satisfy. All right. The citizen always says, no, this is content-based. Give me strict scrutiny, right? So, okay, so what are the sort of elements of this? How do you get to this favorable test that you only need to be reasonable for? So the first element, is the restriction justified without reference to the content of the speech? In other words, this first bullet, is it content neutral? Right? If you have a content-based restriction or a viewpoint-based restriction, you can't say you're TPM, right? There's not time, place, manner. If the regulation is based on the content, you can't use this test. It's not up there, but if it's viewpoint also, you can't use that test. This is why I use parades as an example. Anyone who walks into City Hall and applies for a parade permit, they should never ask you, so why are you having this parade? Do we agree with your message, whatever? You can't ask that question. You can ask them what the purpose is, just for you to know, but you can't grant or deny the permit based on the message. Everyone with me? The second one is where the action is, right? Are the restrictions narrowly tailored to serve a significant or compelling governmental interest? What does that mean? Why do you have this restriction? So again, I'll give you very easy examples. You can't have a parade at 2 a.m, right? Is that narrowly tailored to serve an interest? Sure there are. People are asleep. There's no police. There's lots of good reasons why you don't have a parade at 2 a.m. Or you only have a parade on Sunday. You don't have it during rush hour, right? Of course, you don't want to disrupt traffic. That's a very good reason that's not based on the content of your message. These are neutral policies. Okay? The third one, are there other channels to communicate the information? So, for example, if we don't give you a permit on Friday, you can get a permit on Sunday. Yeah, there are other ways to do your parade. You might not do it the exact day you want, but close enough. Okay? If you can get through these 3 factors, then you're basically home free. Your regulation is going to survive. But if in fact you have a content-based restriction, you will not survive these regulations. Let me say this a little differently. These 3 factors are determining if it indeed is content neutral, if there's sufficient tailoring, if there are other ways of conveying the message. If all these 3 check off, it's justified, it's narrowly tailored, there are other opportunities, then you're home free. Yeah.
The other opportunities, meaning there's other opportunities in time, place.
Yes.
But when you say manner, you say, well, you don't need to do a parade. Why don't you just have a little speech over here on the stage?
Right. That's probably pushing manner a little bit too far, because if you want to give a speech or a parade, that's the message you want to convey. And in fact, as we walk through the Rock Against Racism case, the court would even let them say you have to give the same message at a lower volume. That wouldn't be enough. So it's the same message, perhaps at a different time or a different place. But the court here, we'll get to in a minute, basically says that manner means loud, and that's part of the manner of your message. And to use a homeless example as well, if your message is the White House is not doing enough to address homelessness in Washington, D.C., that's your message, right? Could you convey that message anywhere else in Washington other than the White House? Probably not. Probably not. Maybe yes, probably not. Right? So in other words, is the ban on sleeping in a park based on the content of their speech? No, there's a ban on camping in a park. That's a general neutral ban. Is a ban on evening camping narrowly tailored to serve an interest? You could probably say that. There's no security on staff. People keep it clean, risk of crime. But are there alternative channels to communicate that information? If you have the protest anywhere else, would it be as effective? So it probably falls on the third one. If I have to go back and review that case, that's probably I would just to not exactly what the court said, but I'm trying to illustrate the principle. Make sense? Mm-hmm. All right, so let's walk through this test. All right. Now, by the way, this is not O'Brien. It's going to be similar to O'Brien, but it's not O'Brien. My exam's open book, so you don't have to memorize these tests. It's not actually a very useful thing to try to do, but you should at least try to distinguish in your notes how this test differs from the O'Brien test. It's sort of they're similar. There's about tailoring and the like, but they're a little bit different. All right, everyone with me? All right, good. All right. Maybe one way to sort of reconcile O'Brien, when it's content neutral, time, place, manner, we use this test. When it's prohibiting sort of symbolic speech, we use O'Brien. And they're used sort of in different contexts. Everybody with me? All right, Jacob, I think you're up next. Let's do the first factor. The regulation in New York about the loud music you need to use their tech. Is that made without reference to the content of the speech? Let me say without the negatives. Is that regulation based on content? It's not. Why not?
Because they don't care what band racism. Another band with a different message. They don't really care. They just care about the volume, preserving peace.
No, that's exactly right. So the first one's easy, right? This is content neutral. New York has the same policy for everybody. Now, you might imagine if it's Shakespeare in the Park, they don't really care as much, but they're still required to use the city's tech, right? You can't use your own equipment. And that's very common if you go to Discovery Green, whatever else. You use their equipment. You don't bring your own stuff because who knows if it's going to break, it might not work, there's interference and so on. So the first one is not a problem, right? The mere fact they say you have to use our technology doesn't create a problem. So this is content neutral. The court also says the city has an interest in sound quality, that when there are people listening to music, it sounds good. That sounds a little, you're laughing, Jacob. Why are you laughing?
I just thought that was kind of a joke that they put in there. They were serious.
That was weird, right? It did. I mean, does New York really care if you go to a rock concert if it sounds good?
I think that if you have to require everybody to use your equipment, it'd be kind of messed up if they're like, you got to use our equipment, but you have some big super band that everybody wants to hear, and they come and they're playing on the city's equipment, and it sounds terrible.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, Jake, let me ask you this question: whose equipment do you think is better? I don't know, the Rolling Stones or New York City Parks Department?
Rolling Stones is probably still better.
Right. So, I mean, maybe that's an answer going back to my question to Anna a few minutes ago. Maybe the reason why it violates your free speech is by using the city's crappy tech, it makes music sound worse. Right? The court here assumes that using government speakers are better. Does anyone believe that for a second?
They just say it was adequate. It's not gonna.
Government, we're adequate, right? That's a slogan, right? Right. But I mean, to Anna's point before, a few minutes ago, if you're a world-class rock band, you're probably gonna have better equipment. You've calibrated it, you've tested it to your band members. You know how it works, right? You can tweak it and so on. So in some ways, having your own tech actually makes your speech better. But anyway, the court assumes that the city will be doing adequate, to use your word, right? An adequate job mixing the music. Okay. All right, let's do the second, Kevin. The second factor is New York's restriction narrowly tailored to serve a significant governmental interest. What do we do here? What? Tell me again. What's the government's interest here, please?
Trying to prevent noise in a park designed for quiet recreation, as well as I think there's a housing in there, as well as for some reason sound quality, which is still a little confused.
Yeah, I'm confused too. Aaron, is your hand up?
No, I'm just.
No, that's fine. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kevin. I'll come back to you in a second, Kevin. So the government's interest is sound quality and preventing too much noise from spilling over. As Justice Kennedy says, protecting the tranquility of the home of the really, really rich people on the Upper West Side, right? On Central Park West. That's the government's interest. Kevin, let me finish it up. How is this regulation narrowly tailored to serve that interest?
There's some sort of connection between the interests that they have and the action that they're taking.
Good. I like the way you said that. There's some sort of connection between their interest and the action they're taking. So, Eric, how close is the fit between the regulation and the interest they're trying to achieve? Mm-hmm.
Obviously, people flashing rockets in park next to people's homes is a nuisance.
But I know it's a nuisance, but in terms of narrow tailoring, how is requiring the rock band to use the government's tech narrowly tailored? Is it narrowly tailored?
I think in the court's mind it is.
Well, what did the Court of Appeals do? What did the lower court do? More?
The Supreme Court sorted out the narrowly tailored part. The court.
What did had the Court of Appeals approach this prong, this element? What did the Court of Appeals do here?
The Court of Appeals said that it was not narrowly tailored
Correct. Why did the Court of Appeals say it's not narrowly tailored?
because there were other means that they could have controlled it by.
Good. What's the test that they applied? How did the lower court frame the narrowly tailored prong? These are very particular phrasing, which you may not have seen before.
Less restrictive alternative.
Yes, the least restrictive alternative. Let me just make that very clear. The least restrictive alternative. What does that mean, Jamar? Just in plain English.
It means that they could have enforced the law by not requiring them
What does least mean? Least restrictive alternative.
not as invasive or
Not just not as invasive. Can there be any other way of doing it? Minimum, right? When you see this test, we'll come back to this in the free exercise clause context. Least restrictive means, just put that in your notes. Least restrictive means. That means that there's only one way to do it. It's not just about narrow tailoring, it's the most narrowly tailored way of doing it. Right? You have to have as little burden on speech as possible. Anything more than the minimum, to use Nick's word, is too much. Anything more than the absolute minimum is too much. So the lower court applied the least restrictive means approach. So Aaron, if we were applying this test, say there was a correct test, what might be another way that they could restrict the noise output from the concert hall, other than requiring them to use their technology?
I mean, they could
Other than
they could restrict the time that they were allowed to play.
what else they could do?
They could.
Well, if the problem is too much noise, what can they tell the band to do? Decibels. Let me call on you first, but you're right. Decibels. You say you cannot have more than X decibels, or you must pass a sound check. Right? Use your own tech. You have to go to a sound check with the government to approve it beforehand. What the Court of Appeals do is they sort of hypothesize all these other regulations that might work. Right? The Court of Appeals said, you didn't do this, and you didn't do this, you didn't do this. That is sort of like a strict scrutiny analysis, isn't it? Right? If you could do it better, you should have done that. Ryan, did the Supreme Court agree with that standard?
With the least restrictive.
Did the Supreme Court agree with the least restrictive means test?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so? Why do you say that?
I'm not sure.
Did you read it?
I did read it.
It's an important part of the case. I'll come back to you. Leighton?
They tossed it out.
They toss it out. Why they toss it out?
I mean, they basically said that the Court of Appeals tried to say that this is like a Ryan, but they're not.
Too strict. The Court of Appeals applied something like strict scrutiny. And what they're saying here is we don't go that strict, right? Narrow tailoring does not mean the least restrictive means, the least intrusive means, right? And the court gives this sort of reframing. What does narrowly tailored mean? I'll just paste it here next to the second bullet, just so you have it in your notes. Oops. If the regulation promotes a substantial government interest that will be achieved less effectively absent the regulation. So you see what's going on here. We go from narrow tailoring, which sounds a lot like strict scrutiny, to substantial interest and least effectively absent, much more wishy-washy, maybe rational basis or intermediate scrutiny. They watered down the narrowly tailored prong. They watered it down. So it's not enough that it's not required to have the least restrictive means. It's adequate to simply have something that, if you did this for this would be less effective, right? In other words, if you required a sound check with decibel counts, is that less effective? Maybe that's good enough, right? They don't have to choose the most narrowly tailored means anymore. Adi.
Wait, how did they? Oh, so they, okay. I was about to say, wait, how did they change it?
They watered it down.
Before it was the. Are you saying they near?
Well, look. If you look at what narrow tailoring means, that usually sounds a lot like strict scrutiny. But let me just read this one again. It's narrowly tailored if the regulation promotes a substantial governmental interest that would be achieved less effectively absent the regulation. What does that mean? If New York got rid of their sound check regulation, would the government's interest be pursued less effectively? Yeah. So in other words, if this helps the government achieve their goal more effectively, it's fine.
Did they change or they watered down narrowly tailored from what? Was this?
Well, again, this is what the standard was, right? Narrowly tailored. And narrowly tailored usually means you have to have a very close fit between the means and the ends. And they changed that to basically substantial relationship tests. Okay. The courts cannot scrutinize and say, well, you could have done this, you could have done this, you could have done this. All you have to say is this an effective regulation? Is it related to what you're trying to do? Good enough. So as a result, the New York law survives that. If New York did not adopt this regulation, there would be more noise. That's enough. It's not up to see, is it the best regulation? Is this good enough? Is it adequate, right? Is this an adequate regulation? If it is, it survives. Okay, go with me. Everyone see what they did to that second element. They sort of watered it down a bit. So long as it's sort of an effective way of achieving their goal, it'll probably survive the second test. This is why people hate the First Amendment doctrine. It's just very complicated and doesn't make sense. Answer. Yes, sir. Yeah, and this is what narrowly tailored means. You don't like it, I can see. It's okay. I'm just telling you what's in the case. I report. I don't get to make up the law. They don't want to hear from me. That's for damn sure. Some scholars. All right. Give them with me. Okay. All right. Let's do the third factor if we can. We sort of jump past it. I'll come back to you, Ryan. How does the court approach the third factor?
They feel like the third factor is relatively easily met
Why?
because because controlling the volume and having this requirement doesn't infringe on anything that the constable organizers are trying to do. It doesn't infringe on their expression or time and place. It's just it may be less, the quality of the show may be degraded, but that doesn't, they say that doesn't want.
Well, look, so I'll give you the easy question, the hard question. Can they have their concert somewhere else?
Sure.
Is there anything special about Central Park to communicating their message?
No.
In other words, their message is we need to end racism. Is there anything specific about the Sheep's Meadow at Central Park that's linked to the message? It's like camping from the White House. Right. Okay. So there are other alternatives, But Ryan, here comes the harder question, right? The rockers argue that the message is tied to volume, right? And that their expression will be limited if they can't rock out loud. Is regulating the volume a type of a manner regulation? Is regulating the volume regulating the manner of the speech? Even though they say that the volume itself is part of their message. Louder is their message.
Not according to the government,
You tell me why.
because it doesn't have any, doesn't change their message.
It does a little bit, doesn't it? What does the court say about this? Does reducing the volume affect?
It says it may reduce the degree of
Very good.
the potential audience,
Some degree.
some degree.
All right, so here's the rub. The court says, look, we understand that reducing the volume will, to some degree, affect the message. That's not enough. And they tie it back to tranquility and peace and order. So yes, the loudness, the volume does in some way affect the manner, but not enough to take it out of the sort of this more deferential scrutiny. All right, so in the end, the court upholds New York's regulation. They say it's narrowly tailored, it's content neutral, and there are other channels of communication that are open for them to express their message. Therefore, this is a reasonable time, place, manner, reasonable TPM regulation. Okay. Adi?
So is it basically just like for time-lapse and manner restrictions, as long as they're not content or viewpoint based, they're just always going to survive because they're just going to like roll over and be like, whatever you say.
Roll over, yeah, like a puppy, right? I don't. That's probably right in most cases. So long as you get around saying content neutral, time, place, manner, it's probably going to survive. This is why governments always argue, oh, this is time, place, manner, this is viewpoint neutral, right? This is content neutral. And then they fight over the first prong. Because once you get past the first prong, you're home free. There's always other ways of expressing your message, some other channel. And if you take this sort of this deferential, is it, effective and so on, it's hard to flunk that test for the government. All right. Questions on, yes, sir.
First, 8-4, CS4 versus Rock happened.
I'm sorry, the trial court you're asking about?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I'm asking, I'll get to the end, right? So I'm asking because I recognize that it's in 1989 and it was in New York.
Yeah.
And I think the central jogger situation happened in the same year of 1989. I know you mentioned why would it being in New York be so important for their cause.
Oh, they've been having concerts here for years. I don't think it was related, but that was a good connection. I didn't make that one.
So I just figured racism and racism.
Oh, there was racism earlier too. Right. Yeah. But I think it was in the early 80s or mid 80s. This case took a couple years to wind its way up. You can check Westlaw. Just go to Westlaw, put the year, and check the district court opinion.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it really quickly, but I couldn't, so that's why I asked.
I don't remember the top of my head. It's a good thought. Oh, is it linked to the Central Park joggers? That's interesting. That didn't make it into the opinion. I'd be curious if it made it into the briefing. Good thought. And I don't think there was a dissent in this case. There probably would have been dissent if that was on the docket, I think, for a concurrence. Good thought. I didn't think of that. It's very creative. All right. What else we got? All right. Let's move on to our next case. Did you all read this one in torts? All right. How much of this you actually read in torts? How much of the experts? They give you just a little bit, or they give you all the First Amendment stuff? How do you even know about this stuff in torts? I mean, it makes no sense. All right. Is your exam?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So we have libel, we have slander, right? Generally, slander is going to be spoken, temporary, libel, something that's permanent and is fixed. Okay. Truth is always a defense to libel. We know that much. Okay. We're done. Amy, back to your facts. You're my facts person today. They had this at the American Samoa Law School. They're very big on facts. I did- Is that their mascot? I never watched that. I didn't watch Breaking Bad either. I don't watch TV. Too much stuff to do. All right. All right. You want me the facts, please, here in Sullivan, please?
So there was a committee, and they were called themselves a committee to defend Martin Luther King, and they published a full-page ad in the New York Times, and it was basically calling out the public officials in Montgomery, Alabama, for different acts that they had done, furthering their viewpoints.
Yeah, let me just pull it up. I have the ad right here. So the big headline is "Heed the Rising Voices," and what it was quoting from a New York Times editorial from 1960. And there's a couple columns of text, and it describes. I'll get to the facts of this in a minute, but it describes events that happened in the South concerning the Civil Rights Movement. Under it, it says your help is urgently needed now, and there's all these signatures, and it's a pretty impressive list. I mean, there's Harry Belafonte, we got Marlon Brando, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis. These are names that even half a century later. We got, they might know their names. Langston Hughes, you definitely know that name, I think. Eartha Kitt. Jackie Robinson, Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, these are some pretty influential people, right? And what were they doing? What was like the sort of the call to action? Why were they all putting their names on this list? Oh, also a number of members of clergy from the South as well. Right. Okay. Yeah. What was the call to action?
Well, it had the little coupon, send support and.
Right. It was fundraising. Right. Before the internet and before Twitter, if you wanted to fundraise, you put a newspaper ad. Now it sounds like stupid, but this was effective. You had a full page ad in the New York Times. This wasn't cheap, by the way. It was not cheap. You knew the people across the country would see this, and they cut out this little coupon and they mail a check to support this committee to defend Martin Luther King. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why this communication was so effective, right, was because it sort of told this very powerful story of what was going on in the American South. Okay. Now, it's critical of the government, no doubt. And people alleged that these statements were, at least some of the statements were false. Anna, what were some of the statements in there that turned out to not be accurate?
Well, I remember they said that Martin Luther King was arrested 7 times.
Yeah.
So he was arrested 3 times.
I would just pause. There was no Google back then, right? I want to just be very clear about that, right? If I had to Google today, how many times was MLK arrested? I can get you a number in 5 seconds. So, maybe cut them some slack in that one. I don't know, maybe right. All right. What were some of the other things that were quite right?
I think they said they lost the cafeteria to starve the students.
That sounds pretty bad. And what actually happened? Or did that actually happen? Not exactly. There was no locking. There was some dispute over whether people who didn't have a meal plan or tickets were allowed to eat. The facts, as you can imagine, are not always clear with these sorts of things. And then what else was some of the allegations in the story?
They said that students were expelled, but I think they just were boycotting on a single day.
Yeah, and they were ringed, and there was tear gas, and so some of the claims were false. All right. So Adi, just for an easy point, did the communication mention Mr. L.B. Sullivan anywhere?
It alluded to
the government, right? So it didn't name him by name, but it was referring to the government, and it wasn't really disputed that he was one of the commissioners, so he was part of the government. And Adi, also, was this an article in the Times, or was this a commercial? An advertisement. Oh, you're answering my next question. Was this a journalistic article, or was this a commercial that an advertisement that was run by.
I thought they said it was.
You're giving me the answer to my next question. Was this written by New York Times journalists?
No.
Is this freedom of the press?
Well, somehow this was state action, right?
You're answering my third question, right? Wait, let's say the first question. Was this an exercise of journalism?
No.
No, it's not journalism. Who wrote it? Who wrote this advertisement? The committee. Okay, the committee wrote it.
Yes,
Okay, the committee wrote it. So it's a curious thing with the freedom of speech case that even applies to a paid advertisement. We'll do later this term what's called commercial speech. And this was Adi's second question she answered for me. It's often said that commercial speech is given less scrutiny, less protection. But at least here, they treated the advertisement, the Times, no different than if it was an actual article in the Times. Another question, Adi. The case is called Sullivan, New York Times against Sullivan. Why is this against the New York Times and not the Committee to Protect Martin Luther King? Why is the defendant the New York Times here?
I actually didn't really get that, but I'm gonna guess because they published it.
Oh, they published it? What else does the New York Times have? Who do you usually sue? You learned this much in torts. Who do you usually sue, Nick? Thank you. The deeper pockets. So they went after the New York Times, right? So Nick, I'll give you the follow-up. Why do you think Mr. Sullivan sued not the Committee to Defend Martin Luther King? They sued the New York Times, other than deep pockets. What were they trying to do here with this lawsuit?
They probably didn't. What do you mean?
Why would you sue a newspaper and not the people who actually ran the defamatory advertisement?
Well, that would probably look like they were against their cause too.
Oh, they were damn straight against their cause. He was a segregationist. Yes, he was against their cause for sure, right? But my question is different. Why would you sue the New York Times here? What are you trying to do with that sort of lawsuit?
Maybe create a precedent that
Yeah.
newspaper publishers can't publish that.
You want a chilling effect. When I say chilling effect, I mean you chill speech. If you make the cost of publishing this speech so high, the newspaper might say, we're not going to take this advertisement in the future. You guys can go on your own, right? So the exact purpose was to increase the cost of running these ads and to chill the speech, right? Again, if you have these defamation suits, every time an advertiser comes to the Times, they have to do fact checking. And they have to say, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? That's expensive. It's easier to say, we're not going to run this commercial. Okay. One other related point. Cody, is the New York Times an individual or a corporation?
What did you say? What are
Is the New York Times an individual or a corporation?
corporation?
Do corporations have free speech rights? So this is one last point. So we did Citizens United, I think, last week. And the big issue is, do corporations have free speech rights? Well, they do with their newspapers. Everyone agrees with that much. But I guess if you're Citizens United, it's a little bit more controversial. Okay. Everyone with me. All right. So the Times ran this commercial. Sullivan sued the Times for defamation, and he got substantial damages, right? Substantial damages. And the statements were, without any question, false, right? They made false statements. And these are statements that damaged the reputation of Mr. Sullivan. This is black letter defamation law, right? Not right, because we have William Brennan at the helm. I'm not a fan of Justice Brennan. It's any Brennan opinion. He always does this. In the very last sentence, the last paragraph, here's this one thing that tells you this brand new test. He sort of just announced in the way. It's like, adios, here's the test. And he sort of just mentions it very casually. So the actual malice thing is just kind of thrown at the end, and so on. Okay. So at the trial, they awarded $500,000 of damages. That's a lot of money back in the 1960s. That's a very substantial sum. And even if the New York Times could afford to pay that judgment, small newspapers could not. And the express purpose of this lawsuit was to chill expression, was to say, all of you media outlets, you support things from MLK and these other people, we're going to sue you for defamation. Make any mistake, we're going to nail you on it. So this is, again, designed to chill speech. The Supreme Court reverses it. Now, Adi asked me a minute ago, Where's the state action? Now, didn't we say the first week of class, the First Amendment only protects you against the government? Dylan, why does the First Amendment even apply if you defame me, right? You're a private citizen. I'm a private citizen. How can I sue you for defamation? How can you raise the First Amendment? I'm a private citizen. I can say whatever the hell I want. Where does state action even come in? Ooh,
I didn't.
that's not in the
State
case.
action.
That's not in the case.
Is it because he's a public official?
No. Private citizens too. If you sue me for defamation, I can raise the First Amendment's defense.
The type of speech being public?
Nothing to do with public speech. Yeah.
Would it be like the action of the judicial, like?
Yes. It's the court acting. Do you remember what case from property might be relevant here in the class I teach? About state action.
The racism case, without like they're saying it's not constitutional, unconstitutional.
Shelley versus Kramer, very good. You got it. See, you got it. It's your question. You finished it up.
I don't know what the case was about. I remember the name.
Shelley versus Kramer about the racially restrictive covenants. Remember this from property? So you have private citizens who are enforcing a racially restrictive covenant on real property. The court held it's a violation of equal protection. Where's the state action? You're asking the courts to enforce this racist agreement. That's state action. So same here. You're asking the courts to enforce a judgment that self-violates the First Amendment. That's a state action. Not obvious, by the way. Right? I mean, a lot of people think that Sullivan's wrong. In fact, there's a note on this. Justices Thomas and Gorsuch just said we need to reverse New York Times against Sullivan. I'd say there's a 25% chance the case is scaled back significantly. If I had to guess, they get limited to public figures and not public officials and not just people who are famous. American libel law is actually very, very protective of free speech. And if you go to Europe, it's not like that. Libel is much more effective. The Royals sue for libel defamation all the time. All right. So the court says there's state action. This is kind of like Shelley v. Kramer. To Adi's point before, this is not considered so-called commercial speech. They treat this advertisement the same way they would an article in the New York Times. That's actually not there. Okay. Let's see, where do I start? Okay. Jacob, what does actual malice mean?
It means that you knew what you were saying was false, or you just had reckless disregard for whether it was false.
All right, so if I just say, you know what, Jacob, your shirt is red. Your shirt's red. Is that actual malice? Jacob is wearing a red shirt.
Well, yeah, I would say it's you have knowledge that it's false.
I'm looking right at you, right? It's blue. Right? If you make a statement that's blatantly false, and you either knew or had some reason to know it was false, you act with actual malice. I don't know, maybe people who know torts for they can tell me why it's called actual malice. Malice seems to be a very negative term, but it's not about your sort of your mens rea, it's about your knowledge, right? It's not about, malice aforethought, right? Remember Krim read it, right? It's saying what was your knowledge? Did you know it was false? Or did you have some reason to think it was false? Were you reckless with regard to the truth? Again, red shirt right there. Reckless. I can look at it. It's blue. So what the actual malice standard's doing is saying it's not enough to prove that a statement's false. For example, MLK was arrested 4 times or 7 times, or they didn't ring the campus, and the Star Spangled Banner, my country tis of thee, and the padlock. It's would they have any reason to think it was false? So if you're the New York Times and MLK committee comes to you and says, we want to run this commercial, do you have an obligation to fact check it? With this decision saying it's probably not. You might say, you know what? This is a group of respectable people. Look, all these very dignified people signed the letter. That's good enough for us. What the court is doing is it's increasing the burden to sue for defamation. It's not enough to show that a false statement was made that injured your reputation. You have to show it was a false statement made with actual malice to injure the reputation. Okay. Kevin, When does the court apply the actual malice standard?
When it's a public official, or an issue of public, some sort of public interest to it.
Good. So what makes this case significant is the plaintiff. Again, not the defendant. The defendant's New York Times. The plaintiff is a public official. And the court ties this actual malice standard to the fact that a public official is the plaintiff suing. Eric, why is it significant that a public official is bringing this defamation action? Why is that significant?
Well, courts, if judges are to be treated men of fortitude and able to thrive in a hardy climate, surely the same must be the same of other government officials.
Well, all true, but why is it problematic when government officials bring defamation suits against citizens?
As we mentioned before, chilling effect for those who want to criticize those government officials.
Okay, give me a little bit deeper, right? What experiences have we had in this country of government officials coming after people for their speech? There's one history that Justice Brennan spends a lot of time talking about.
I presume the revolution.
Not revolution. Talk about first week of class.
Oh, the Sedition Act?
Yes, sir. Tell me about it. What was the Sedition Act doing?
Well, prohibiting people from basically publishing statements. I think false statements or malicious statement against the United States government.
Yeah. Exactly. The Sedition Act punish you for publishing false or malicious statements about the government. Even if the statements were true, you could probably be punished for it as well if they were critical of the government. What Brennan's saying here is we need to have breathing space. What do I mean by breathing space? When people criticize the government, they got to be given a little slack, right? Cut them a little slack. Don't hold them to the sort of super exacting standard. We want to err on the side of more space to criticize the government, not less. If you knew that imagine the court went the other way, right? This was a unanimous decision, I know. Imagine the court came out the other way. And I knew that anytime I criticize the government, I can be sued for defamation. And you know they're coming after you, right? That's one way to get people to shut up, is to sue for defamation. It would shrink. It would contract the sphere in which we can communicate about why government's good or bad. And what the court's saying is that the experience from the Alien Sedition Act teaches us that we cannot have this sort of cramped view of free speech. We need to give people more space to make statements critical of the government. And that's what the actual malice standard accomplishes. It puts a greater burden on governmental plaintiffs that if they want to sue for defamation, they have to show not only the statement was false, they have to show that it was made recklessly, that with knowledge it was false, or at least they should have known it was false. And this rule is specifically tied to, as Kevin said a minute ago, government officials or matters of governmental concern. So imagine you're not criticizing government officials, you say you're criticizing a policy like, the legislature passed a statute that does X, Y, and Z. And it's false. It only does X and Y, it doesn't do Z. It's an honest mistake. You can still make that statement. You can't be sued for defamation, right? So if there's some governmental policy or some governmental official whom you make a false statement about that injures your reputation, that's not enough. You have to show that you did it recklessly. And you guys know this from torts and crim. Proving state of mind, not easy. It's not easy to prove state of mind, especially when the person's not complicit, not going to help you out. In other words, you sue him for defamation, you think he's going to say, oh yeah, I made this statement intentionally and recklessly. You got proof from the circumstances, which is often very hard to do. This decision, for better or worse, I'll let you decide, made it almost impossible to sue government officials to sue for defamation. Almost impossible in this country. In other countries, they do it all the time. But in this country, it's not. So if you make a false statement, unless you do so recklessly, you got the breathing space to make that statement. Brennan says the Sedition Acts were never invalidated in court. But he says in the court of history they cannot stand. I think that's probably the modern view, at least by 6 or 7 members of the court, that the Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. If the court came out the other way, the New York Times would stop publishing these things. That would be very bad. Orion's your hand up? Truth is still a defense, so you can always prove the statement's true. But if it's false, you have this backstop. And again, actual malice means knowledge that it was false, or with reckless disregard whether it was false. Knowledge that it was false, or reckless disregard. So in your notes, we have this category next to libel. Make sure you include actual malice, right? Because the actual malice is like an off-ramp from the libel category. Even if you defame someone and you do not engage with actual malice against a public official, there's no liability under the First Amendment. All right. Questions? In this case, the actual malice standard was not met. All right. Why? Because he just made it up, right? He just made up a new standard, so they have to remand for a new trial. All right. Everybody with me? Okay. Any questions on Sullivan? Any questions on Sullivan? All right. There was another case. I didn't assign it, but it's in your book. Gertz versus Welch from 1974. The court limited the actual malice rule to public figures. But if you're a public figure, you're subject to the actual malice standard. And who's a public figure? It's actually kind of a weird thing. So celebrities are generally considered public figure. But let's say, you're a nobody and then you do something that makes you famous. Someone who like runs in the, someone who wins the lottery, right? It's a nobody who suddenly became, front page news. You might actually make yourself a public figure for that purpose. I'll give you an example. Do you remember a couple years ago there was a rally at the National Mall, and there were some kids from Covington High School, the Catholic high school in Kentucky. Remember this one? And they had an incident with a guy who was dressed up in Indian garb, and a lot of the media presented him as like, this taunting this Indian guy. They actually watched full video. It wasn't true. It just was completely made up. They sued for defamation, and one of the problems was they said by these kids being there at the mall, they inject themselves into this national crisis, and they made themselves famous, public figures. But the only reason they were public figures is because the media falsely defamed them as being in this national attention. So it's a very squishy thing of how quickly one can become a public figure. And once you become a public figure, you lose the benefit of defamation law because you have to prove actual malice. And a lot of these newspapers actually settled with these kids because they were going to lose a lot of money because they were just kids, at a Lincoln Monument. That was my final exam question a couple of years ago about this issue. I think I was asked about it at some point. All right, questions? No? Okay. All right. Let's move on to next case. Let me play some audio for this one. Yeah. John Roberts, tell us what happened. Oh, it always does this. It's very annoying. It for whatever reason, whenever I connect the Bluetooth microphone, it like tries to put the sound out through my Bluetooth microphone, which is not actually a microphone.
The members of the Westboro Baptist Church believe that God hates and punishes the United States for, among other things, its tolerance of homosexuality. particularly in America's military.
Sorry.
He explained that.
The church has chosen to communicate these views by picketing at military funerals and has frequently done so for the past 20 years. Fred Phelps, who founded the church, and 6 Westboro Baptist parishioners, all of whom happen to be related to Phelps, traveled to Maryland to picket the funeral of Marine Lance Corporal Matthew Snyder, who was killed in Iraq in the line of duty. Picketing took place on public land approximately 1,000 feet from the Catholic church where the funeral was held.
The protesters held signs with awful messages.
Thank God for dead soldiers. Bags doom nations. Thank God for 9/11. America is doomed. Hope in hell. And God hates you.
Matthew Snyder's
Okay, so you get the gist. Has anyone ever seen the Westboro Baptist? Or is it, you did? Where'd you see him?
I saw them passing, driving through, where the church is.
You in Kansas?
Yeah, we were driving through.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I've never. Okay. They never came to your campuses? Yes, if I've had students over the years who have seen them. They came to A&M a number of years ago. These are some pretty awful people. One of the things about the First Amendment, how do I put this gently? The people who get to the Supreme Court are generally not the good guys, right? The people there because they're trying to do something very bad. And a lot of the court's most important First Amendment cases involve people whose speech you may not like. And kind of a gut check, as we say for free speech, is, are you willing to protect the speech of someone that you vehemently disagree with and think is awful? And that's a question that you can only ask yourselves, and I won't give you an answer. But this is one of these cases that was 8-1. And you can be darn sure that John Roberts and Nino Scalia and Clarence Thomas are not fans of the Westboro Baptist. I can tell you that with a high degree of certainty. But they all voted for him. Sam Alito just couldn't stomach this one. He dissented by himself. But this was an 8-1 decision. Okay. All right. So you remember from torts, right? So you remember from torts defamation, and you remember from torts the tort of IIED, the intentional infliction of emotional distress. Remember this? Did you study this case in torts by chance? Okay, good. So, Jamar, just what is IIED before we even get to the First Amendment? Just I will make you stand and recite it, I promise, right? But what's an IIED tort?
Any language or an action that hurts someone's feelings.
Oh boy, is that what you guys learn in torts? Hurt someone's feelings? Is that what I'm not criticizing. Just I don't.
I wasn't ready for this question. I didn't even highlight that.
That's okay. Anyone remember the elements of IIED? Just memorize this.
Extreme and outrageous conduct that
Caused by another person or third party. Is it a third party?
And with what effect?
either intended or known or should have known.
To cause extreme emotional distress.
I love you guys all doing this in unison. This is lovely. It's like a collective brain from 1L, right? Okay, good. I think you all got more or less, right? So some sort of extreme or emotional conduct. And actually, I like Jamar's discussion. Hurts your feelings, right? It's a dignitary tort, right? It's not a battery, right? They're not hitting you. It's not a trespass. They're not coming into your property. They're not, expropriating your property. They're not converting your property. It's up here, right? Jamar, I'll come back to you. How does a tort like IIED sort of sit in tension with the First Amendment? We're saying all this stuff about I don't care if you find a burning American flag offense. It's too damn bad, right? How does just this tort sort of sit alongside of what we've just learned the last couple weeks?
Well, we care about the well-being of people, and so we don't want to censor speech that gives people a public concern that we don't know what we're talking about, but we don't want to allow people to bring in people's private baggage and put it out there to the world.
Yeah.
Feel bad.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. So, perhaps one of the risks of teaching this class in the First Amendment is we always think about the speaker, right? The right of the speaker. And then when the person's criticizing the government, we say, well, who damn cares, right? Let them be critical of the war. Let them be critical of the draft, right? Let them be critical of the American flag, right? But this case is different, right? This is not like a case we've had this semester. It's not a person burning a draft card to protest the war, or burning a flag to protest a political party. It's you have these people who are going in front of a funeral. We'll talk about where exactly they were in a minute, but they're going to a funeral for the express purpose of inflicting massive harm on these people.
The damages.
On appeal,
Westboro challenged the verdict on the ground that the First Amendment fully protected its speech.
Let me put that in some colloquial street talk. You hurt my feelings. The First Amendment says you don't get $11 million.
So they let her argue for the Supreme Court, but not me. I'm just kidding. Seriously, that's actually Margie Phelps. She argued for the U.S. Supreme Court this case. Yeah. What? Yeah, serious. She's actually Fred Phelps' either daughter or niece, or they're all related. It's kind of weird. It's just this entire family, a clan, you might say. Yeah, but
Wait, did she argue because she had an interest in the case? Like,
she was her lawyer.
Okay, she was a lawyer.
Yeah, but she got up there. She wasn't very good, but you can just see her vest. Yeah, I mean, she did not wear that to the court. But my point is, if I can find it. My point is, what you said though was actually on point. It's you don't get $11 million thing. You hurt my feelings. Yeah. Oh, here I found it. So, so this actually was from 2010, and I went to the Supreme Court for that day for argument. I didn't go to the case, but I was just walking around, and I found this guy in the street. And at least I can just play this for a minute. And you get the idea. He was there with his son, and I was just talking for a few minutes, and I recorded it. You can't see him; I had much shorter hair then. You see another guy. I think that was his son over there with the same T-shirt on. But why are they right? Why are they doing this? Right? Why are these people there? They are there to inflict a message that they feel strongly about, and they do it in the place where they think it's most effective. Right? This guy's standing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Right there. The Baptists, where are they doing it? They're doing it right in front of the funeral, the cemetery. Why are they doing it? I asked him, you can watch this video later, it's on YouTube. He wants people to hear his message, and the way he gets his message across is by standing in this location with his, on the bright green T-shirt, God hates Muslims, right there in his T-shirt. Right? I remember this guy. His name was Orlando. I talked to him for a few minutes afterwards. So you're like, what the hell are you doing here? And trying to get, and he's convinced of his biblical truths. He was from Alabama, and he was sympathetic to Phelps's views. All right. Where am I now? Okay, let's go back to the case. So they protest. Actually, look at the facts straight. Aaron, just be clear. Were the Baptists protesting inside the cemetery?
No.
Were they right on the sidewalk outside the cemetery?
No.
Where were they standing?
They were standing on public property.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't near.
It was pretty far. It was like 200 feet.
It was.
Yeah.
I think it was 1,000 feet from where the ceremony was being held. You couldn't see them.
Right. That was my next question. Anticipated. Did Mr. Snyder, the Marine's father, even see the protesters?
No, he didn't see them until later on the news.
He might have seen them while he was going in, but he didn't really notice them. Might have seen the tops of their signs. He saw it on the news later. So Aaron, just one more question. When you think of the IIED tort, right? Does it inflict emotional distress if it happened like you saw it only hours later after the funeral?
No, some of the language is coming back to me now from sort of
Good. I'm glad. It's a rehab bar review.
extreme and outrageous, so that it is outside the bounds of all human decency. Another
Yeah. I think that's right. So just a matter of tort law, they didn't actually disrupt him at the funeral. They disrupted him later. I'm not an expert in torts, but the jury found verdict for tort damage. So that's not my problem, right? Ryan, let me ask you a follow-up, please. Did the Baptists come there without notice? Did they surprise people by coming there?
No.
They announced they were coming in advance, right?
They ran.
Oh, they coordinated, and where the cops put them?
Where did they put them?
Yeah.
On this, whatever the little area of public land.
Were they could people attack them?
No.
Why not? Find the
Why
picture.
did no one attack them?
Why could no one attack them? What was preventing them from being attacked? Still, these guys with American flags, right? Why are they staying so far away from them? What do you think the police were doing to the Baptists?
Were they providing some kind of security?
They were protecting them. The cops are there not just to. Let me say it differently. The Baptists were not violent, right? We all agree. They went there quietly, held their signs. They didn't really say much. The cops were there to protect the Baptists from being attacked by the people around them. You want to talk about fighting words, right? Look at these signs. Are those fighting words? I'd say so. If you were a member of the Marines, you saw that sign saying God loves IEDs. If you were a gay person walking along that street, right? With those t-shirts, are those fighting words? So the cops were there to protect the Baptists. And they actually erected a temporary fence about 1,000 feet from the church where people could not even go. And they're only there for a few minutes. They're there just long enough to take some pictures and move on. So really their goal was to get this on the news. So people would see it. Same as Clarence Brandenburg, right? He brought the reporters from TV to his KKK rally to broadcast it nationally. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get this publicity. All right. So this happens. Snyder doesn't really see it till the evening on the news, and he sues IIED. And look, I think we can all agree that this is a trauma that no man should have to go through. He just buried his son, who had just been killed in Iraq, young boy, 18, 19 years old, and has to deal with this crap. So he goes to court and he sues. And they get a judgment about $3 million compensatory damages, about $8 million punitive damages. It was reduced later, but still several $1 million of verdict. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Baptists don't have this money. I'm just going to guess that. I think I'm solid ground in saying that, okay? And the Court of Appeals, a district court lowered the judgment, the Court of Appeals reversed, and the Supreme Court grants review. All right. So the first sort of question, which I asked in my sort of flow chart, the court frames a little bit differently. Is this a matter of speech? Yeah, they're speaking. But it's a speech on public or private concern, Leighton. Is the Baptist speech on public or private concern? Why?
Different circumstances of it being kind of a social issue.
When they say God hates you, what are they talking about?
I guess the soldiers that are not
Soldiers or any one particular soldier? When they say you're going to hell, you're going to hell, who are they talking about?
the God that
So this is, I think, the weakest part of the Roberts opinion. Now, you have not taken for common law, but John Roberts, not a fan. He has this habit of deciding things that are not there and not deciding things that are there. It's really frustrating. He's shaking his head, right? So in this case, there's a lot of stuff they sort of just papers over. He just sort of papers it over. For example, a sign that says "You're going to hell." Is that referring to all troops broadly, or is that Mr. Snyder, the deceased Marine? When it says "God hates you," Y-O-U, is he talking about everyone? God hates y'all, right? If you want to be Southerners, right? Texans? I don't do y'all. I'm sorry. I've been here 15 years, still won't say it. Or is it God hates you, Mr. Snyder? Then there's the issue of the epic. The epic. Amy, you know about the epic?
The epic.
The blog post? I
Yes.
keep going over facts. Look at this. 3 questions on facts. It's not deliberate. Just how the class shakes out.
Yes, and it was very directed at the Snyders in that case.
Right. So this was a blog post that they put up, and it referred to Snyder by name. Mr. and Mrs. Snyder. His name was Matthew. He raised him for the devil. He told him God was a liar. Matthew defied his creator. He was Catholic. That's really bad for the Baptists. Oh, until they find me and I'm screwed. Right. God rose up Matthew to strike him down, and so on. Amy, did the Supreme Court, did the Chief Justice consider this blog post, this epic rant, in its decision?
So, not in the majority opinion.
Why did the Chief Justice not talk about the most important thing in the case?
So, he says that everything was really generalized in a bigger, much broader message.
Sure, but as a matter of litigation, why did the court not consider the epic? Did you give her a particular reason why I didn't consider it?
I don't remember why he didn't, but I agreed with the dissent.
Anyone? Yadi?
Because they forgot to bring it up in their petition for cert.
Yeah. Litigation matters, my friend. You know what waiver is? Yeah, this is waiver big league, right? If you don't mention something in your cert petition, it's waived. You have to preserve it for appeal. So Roberts is a meticulous lawyer. Now, Alito's like, oh, come on, this is stupid, right? It was preserved as part of the case. You consider lots of other things. The Supreme Court never actually limits itself to the record. They consider lots of things on the record. So this was a dodge, right? This was John Roberts' way of keeping an 8-1 court together by not considering the most important part. Because I'll come to you, Anna. What if the court had considered this epic, which mentions Mr. Snyder by name, Matthew, right there, black and white? Has that changed the case if you mention the guy by name?
Well, it takes away the whole public.
Yeah.
concerns,
Is there, if they're talking about Matthew in particular, do they have some sort of a First Amendment right to inflict emotional distress on his father by his just by his son's private name?
No, I guess that would kind of be more like.
Let's say the science of saying God hates you said God hates Matthew Snyder. Matthew Snyder, you're going to hell. How would that case turn out?
It would probably kind of be like what Alito said, it just assault.
Yeah, straight up. Right. So again, the Roberts Court, John Roberts, a blessed name, right? The Gospel of John, right? He just papers it over. And I think Alito, I don't know if I agree with Alito's analysis, but Alito's right on the litigation tactic that this was kind of a dodge. Scalia and Thomas went along with it, so you can't scream too loudly, but that's where we are. I don't think Thomas would join this opinion today. I think he's been chastened by the First Amendment in recent years, but just where I am. Okay. But anyway, the court says on the broader issue, this is considered public speech. It's talking about war. It's talking about homosexuality. It's talking about American foreign policy and so on and so on. That's a public concern. So we're not targeting Matthew Snyder. Also, he says it was performed on a public street. And like I said, the sidewalk, the public street is the quintessential public forum. So it's very significant it was done on a public street. All right, so go back to our chart. All right, so this was speech of a public concern. So we add this to the list. Expressive conduct, is it public versus private? Add this to your number 1 on your list, right? Is it a public concern or private concern? In this case, we have a public concern. Adi, I think I called you. Yeah, Nick, let me call on you for this one. Are these fighting words?
Yes.
You damn straight they are. You go up to a Marine's father and you put this in his face. What are these gonna do to you?
He's ready to fight.
He's gonna kill you. Did the court even mention Shklinsky? Did you see it anyone you're reading?
No.
They pretend it doesn't exist. Fighting words is basically dead. I don't want to say this too loudly because it's on your list, but the court has not sustained a fighting words prosecution in like decades. I don't know the last time it happened. And the last time the court had any sustained discussion of fighting words was in RAV, the cross burning case, and the guy says, "Yeah, we don't really do this anymore." So this entire second prong, this categorical standard, Roberts is like pushing it away. We'll do a case in a week or two. I'll tell you the facts now because it's going to trigger you all about crush films. You know what crush films are? You're all good, noble people. This is a form of pornography. People step on animals with high heel shoes.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. That's why I'm giving the warning. You have to read it. So it's called United States Against Stevens, and you have these basically women with these high heel shoes stomping on animals, like little bunnies and stuff. And the government said we want to create a new category for animal cruelty, and the court said no new categories. So this second one, right, categories, it's not expanding and it's contracting. If anything, fighting words doesn't really work anymore. So let's go to our third one. Is this a content-based discrimination? That Cody is enforcing IIED based on the content of the speech? Well, the tort may not be. The tort may not be content neutral, but is the actual
You're saying like you can't have this viewpoint about
viewpoint? There you go. You got it. Right. Yeah. I mean, who said it hurts your feelings, right? If it's offensive speech, if it hurts your feelings, you have tort damages, right? Is that viewpoint based?
yeah, that's
Yeah. This is why what's her face? Margie Phelps. $11 million doesn't mean you hurt my feelings, right? This is speech that arouses anger, arouses humiliation, arouses disappointment. Because it arouses particular emotions, it's a viewpoint discrimination. So now we have viewpoint discrimination. Cody, we're gonna do strict scrutiny here. What are we doing here? Court doesn't really say, but what how are we reviewing this?
it should be strict scrutiny.
Yeah. Dylan, I'll come back to you. Why is this not a time, place, manner restriction? Aren't they only demonstrating across the street and they have to keep distance? Why is this not a time, place, manner restriction?
It's because they got the permission.
Oh, they got permission. They complied with the rules, right? What's the basis of the suit? Is it whether they got their permit or not?
No, it's about the intentional.
Yeah, the dignitary harm. Exactly right. So this is not TPM, right? So what our 5 or 6 prong thing is basically telling us is this is public speech that's viewpoint based. You're going to win, right? You may not like it, but that's why it's so important for Roberts to make it a public speech because this is private stuff. Private things actually a lot harder of a case. Where else are we going to do? Okay, so it's viewpoint based discrimination. The court cites Texas against Johnson, right? If there's a bedrock principle in the First Amendment, the government may not prohibit the expression of an idea because it's offensive. You cannot ban something because it hurts your feelings. That is not the basis for banning speech. Okay. If they were in the same spot singing God Bless America and God Loves You, no damages. You're only imposing liability because it's harmful speech. In some ways, it's like RAV, burning the cross in their lawn, protesting at the funeral. If speech is directed to harm them, to really make them angry, but the court finds it protected by the Constitution. Yes, Cody.
Is the court going away from fighting words just because of how subjective it is?
I mean, look, Kaplinski was what, 47? Might be off by a couple of years. I think it was 1947, give or take. People were a lot more respectful back then. Today, people are not so nice. We're pretty brash and crude, and God, Lord, help us with social media, right? People say really mean things. If you actually apply the fighting words doctrine, you could have a very powerful censorship tool. Right? Again, I don't want to make fun of social media, but people say stuff for the purpose of provoking. That's what people do. And if we sort of cabin that, we just cut that off because we say, oh, those all fighting words, a lot of people can be silenced. So I think just fighting words does not have a fighting Chance. Sorry. And I'm actually dad, and I can tell dad jokes. I didn't used to be able to do it, but I think I'm allowed to now. Okay. What else? Questions on majority? Who's next? Dylan or Jacob? Yeah, Jacob. Alito. Sent. What does he say?
He thought that it was more of a private issue. He thought that they made it really personal with a lot of their, I guess, promotions of the protest.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can- they like personally went at him, and the parents actually, called him all sorts of other stuff, and Alito they didn't really argue necessarily whether or not they could ban it if it was public. He was just kind of saying they got it wrong and made this up.
Exactly right. Very good. Alito, again, is the court's, if I say his most conservative member, that's not exactly right, but I think he's the most traditional member, right? He's the justice least likely to sort of favor broad reading and civil liberties. Because even Scalia and Thomas, as conservative as they were, had a very strong streak of First Amendment protection. They got it. Scalia joined the majority in the flag burning case. Scalia joined the majority in this case. Both Scalia and Thomas joined the majority in the Animal Crush case we'll study in a few weeks. They both were the majority for the video game violence case we'll read about, whether you can restrict violent video games for kids. But Alito is almost always in these dissents, and he's actually spoken publicly about how it's important to sort of articulate the other perspective. And he makes a few points here I think are worth stressing. He says, look, there are millions of miles of public roads in the United States. There are thousands of parks. There are thousands of churches. They pick only this one place to engage in a verbal assault on the family. They want to wound the family. Why? Because they know the media will be drawn to the side of people who are in grief, right? They target this specifically because they'll get media attention. Again, why did Clarence Brandenburg invite a cameraman and a news crew to his KKK rally, right? Why did Mr. O'Brien burn his draft card in front of the courthouse and not in his backyard? To get attention. People do things to get attention the place they'll get the most attention. They pick it for that reason. Okay. The more outrageous the protest is, the more publicity they can obtain. This is how they get their attention. They're taking advantage of this boy's funeral. Alito also says the signs would be most naturally read to be about Matthew, right? And he factors in the epic, this blog post, which walks through it, which the majority simply did not consider. Alito says these are private figures, and the speech was not on a matter of public concern. He gives an example, right? With defamation, let's say that there's some speech on a public matter, some on a private matter. You do claim by claim. You don't just toss out the entire case, right? You don't segment the case based on the fact that some of it's about public, some of it's about private speech. Okay. And there's no reason why a public street near the funeral should be a free fire zone to have these verbal attacks. Okay. Questions on the dissent? So Kevin, let me ask you, what did your torts professor tell you about what happens at IIED after this case? Does it exist? Is it even a viable cause of action? I'm not a torts professor, I don't know. As best as you can recall.
My understanding is still a valid cause of action. It's just a lot more difficult to prove.
Yeah. Anyone else remember like what would a valid IIED claim look like now if it's not this?
There's some employment law claims, but I mean it's pretty pervasive speech, behavior, like verbal and physical intimidation. It's got to be pretty repeated over a period of time.
So I can imagine, I'll give you an example you're not going to like, but something that's not really speech, desecrating a corpse, that might do it. So imagine, a loved one is in a funeral home and you literally desecrate the corpse, and not as a way of conveying a message, just you're a necrophiliac, right? Sorry.
That's a good one.
You're welcome. I thought that one a couple years ago. Yeah, that's the best I can do.
One sort of hypothetical would be like, if, let's say I know where your child goes to school
Mm.
and I'm there with you, and I've got some kind of problem with you, and I let you know that I know which child is yours.
Is that a threat, though? I mean, you're beyond IAD. You're now a threat, maybe an assault.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, yeah, Ryan, go ahead.
Doesn't the IID group have something to do with what happened to the victim? Then you have to show like the person suffered, like they went, they had to go to counseling and they lost their
Emotional
job.
distress. Yeah,
Then they have to prove all that.
Yeah.
Not just what the other person does.
yeah. I mean, look. So New York Times against Sullivan severely shrank the tort of defamation in America. Made it a lot harder to bring defamation suit. And Snyder against Phelps contracted the IIED tort. So in many regards, tort law and First Amendment law are at odds. And those who have a broad recovery of torts help the victims, the plaintiffs, if you will, depending which perspective you have, is at odds with cases like this. All right, question on Snyder. All right, let me wrap up a bit, and you get yourself out of here. So we're starting to, expand on this chart, and there are just lots of questions for you to sort of think about, right? But you always have to start by sort of characterizing the speech, and now there's a couple ways of characterizing it. We can ask, is it expressive conduct, like burning a draft card or burning a flag? If its speech is about public or private, which actually makes a difference for the IIED court. You have our category of speech like libel, which is not qualified with the actual malice standard if it's a public official or public issue. Fighting words is basically dead. On my exams, I will make it very difficult for you. I will say the year is 1975, the year is 2024, the year is 1901, the year is 1776. I do this many different ways. So you have to know the standards at various points in time. So you can't just say what the Roberts Court says because they're under the current court. They will not be the law forever. Eventually, while someone else in charge. Content-based and viewpoint-based sort of lurks into almost every question, right? If they're telling you what you can say or which perspective you can take, we're probably going to halt that law. And then we have the different forms of scrutiny, right? You have the O'Brien test. We now have the time, place, and manner test as well about how you apply different forms of scrutiny. Next class, we're going to sort of expand on this topic with the reading on the freedom of the press. I actually owe you another reading. It's about the Net Choice case, which was at the Supreme Court this term, about whether Texas and Florida can restrict social media companies. Actually, a very good question. Very good topic. I have to give you a reading for it. I can't remember what to give you. I'll give you something by next week. Okay? Anything else? Have a good evening. I'll see you next time.
No, it's not in your reason article that you said you think that the Trump side is going in.
I think so.
You make